We are welcoming Matt Moreno from Golden Bear Report, which is part of the Rivals.com network. Matt is the king of all West Coast media. He knows a little bit about everything from recruiting to coverage, men's basketball and football. And he's seen this Cal Berkeley team, and he knows what NC State is facing. State is playing at Cal Berkeley at 3:30 p.m. Eastern Time on Saturday. The game will be on the ACC network. Both teams are 0-3 in the ACC. I know for sure NC State did not expect to be there at this point. And obviously, you've seen some very close, heartbreaking losses on the Cal Berkeley side. What has kind of been a synopsis of their season so far?
Well, JC, thanks for having me, first of all. But yeah, it's been a really interesting season. I mean, a lot of programs right now are talking about like, oh, we're only a few plays away from being 6-0 or being undefeated at this point. And that's kind of, you hear that every season. But for Cal, it really does feel like that. I mean, they've lost 3 games by a combined 8 points. It's kind of been the common theme under Justin Wilcox at Cal has been their performance in close games. And in particular, the last 4 seasons, it's really been kind of an issue. They're 5-15 over 20 games, uh, dating back to the 2021 season, in one possession games. And it's just been this hurdle that they cannot get over. And there was a little bit of like, oh, they're breaking through when they played Auburn this year because they had the same thing happen when Auburn came to Berkeley last season. It was a 14-10 game. Cal very much had a chance to win that game. This year they go out to Auburn. They're not favored by in any way. Everyone thinks, well, it's going to be a blowout. They end up winning that game by 7 points, and it's like, okay, they proved it to themselves. They can finally do this. They're breaking through, and you win a game against San Diego State at home, and then you go to Florida State, which was with winless at the time, and you're like, okay, they're going to get this win. They're going to start rolling in the ACC. Turns into a classic kind of Justin Wilcox, Cal rock fight, and they can't get the win, lose by 1 score. And you're like, okay, maybe they're not breaking through. And then the Miami game happens, and you're like, oh, this is a different team. Like they came to play. ESPN College Game Day is in town. This could be the greatest day in Cal history, outside of maybe the play and some of these other games that, that stand out. But it was, it was crazy to watch it all play out. And it was a total meltdown in that second half. And you could just see it coming. And I think every Cal fan was like, oh no, we know how this ends. And then you go to Pitt and you're like, okay, maybe they have a chance. Maybe Pitt overlooks them, get into that game, and it's like, okay, they have a shot here, and things fall apart in the end. They can't get over that hump. And that's kind of been the same story under Justin Wilcox the last several years, and really over the course of his time at Cal has been trying to break through. They're very close to looking like a very good team, and they just end up being a 500 team. And it's been really difficult on Cal fans. Fan base is not very thrilled with their head coach right now. And it's been really interesting to kind of see play out because it does feel like they have the makings of being a very good team, but they just cannot break through that little barrier there of those close losses.
Big picture. Cal Berkeley has made this transition from the Pac-12 to the ACC. What has kind of been the vibe about being in a new league? And then second part of that is ACC media was not hip to the Cal Twitter game.
Hmm.
What is I guess from your standpoint, what has it been like to see the transition from the Pac-12 to the ACC and maybe its effects on recruiting, and maybe explain to uh, ACC fans what has been the history of Cal Twitter?
Yeah, we'll start with kind of the move to the ACC. And I know Justin Wilcox, when that was all playing out, I was there. It was obviously during a time when we were seeing him pretty much every day because they're in the middle of practice. And so we were like, what's the update? And he's like, you guys probably know more than I do at this point. And so, but he was very staunch in like, we want to play in a power conference. Doesn't really matter where it is. Yes, we have our preference for where we'd like to be. But no, that was never divulged publicly. But I think he was very thrilled with being able to move to the ACC. He's been very behind the move. And I think internally there was some questions about the travel and all that with the other sports. But in terms of football, I think there's a lot of excitement. I think the players are very excited. I think again from recruiting, it gave them a chance to continue to say like, "Hey, we're part of a power conference," but also they can branch out into some other areas. Obviously, the academics are a big pool for a lot of players who are looking for that component to their college careers, and so I think they already kind of felt like they could branch out and be a national program. But I think they felt like, "Hey, this bridges that gap even more, and we can be a program that says, hey, we can recruit somebody, from the ACC territory and be like, hey, you're going to play a lot of games in front of family and friends. And so I think it's been well received by everybody. I think the fans maybe had some thoughts about it, but also you've seen them, I think, travel more than they probably have, even in the Pac-12. And so I think they've liked the newness about it. I think they like the seeing, a team that they haven't seen in a long time and facing teams that they maybe never played before. And so um, there's been a good amount of buzz within the fan base and within the program about this move. We'll see if that wears off as time goes on and as these trips get a little bit longer and it's not as exciting because you're going back and playing this team for a second time. You're like, I've already seen this stadium, this venue. I know what this is about. But at this point, everyone is really on board, and I think everyone really likes the move and enjoys the move. In terms of the algorithm, it's been there. It's existed. Ever since I started covering the team really on a full-time basis the last couple of years, it's been prevalent. There's been different pushes from within the fan base for different things. I know last year was about trying to get offensive linemen to Cal, and they started this whole Hogs for Spav. Jake Spavital was their offensive coordinator last year, and he was like, I think he mentioned at one point like, "Oh, I need some Hogs. Like, I need some offensive linemen here." And so they started this whole movement of like Hogs for Spav, and anytime an offensive lineman would get offered or commit, the fan base would go after that recruit and be like, hey, then just kind of spam his likes and or spam his mentions and like, hey, Hogs for Spav, we need you. And so that's where I really started to kind of see like, oh, this is a thing. And it's kind of continued to grow and more people are getting on board. But it's a very passionate fan base, and I think people saw that on a national stage during the ESPN College Game Day event. It was one of those things where I even covering this team and understanding, that there is a big presence online and there is a feel for like there is a good fan base here. The stands are not always filled up at these games. And so you have some thoughts of like, oh, is this really gonna go the way they think it is? And sure enough, it did. And so I think as long as they have a reason to want to root for this team and get behind this team, they're gonna be there. And so yeah, the algorithm has continued to grow. They've definitely leaned into the politics of the West Coast and the Bay Area. And so I think they've kind of made that their kind of tongue-in-cheek calling card. And so it's been really funny to see. And I think, by and large, they're not a fan base that's going to really attack anyone. I think unless they feel like there's, a program coming after them, but it's usually pretty playful and kind of tongue in cheek, but it's been really funny to see. But it is a very passionate fan base. And I think people are now seeing that on a national stage.
Sure. Yeah, I looked up the attendance figures, and I think it was over 56,000 for the Miami game. Um, According to what I saw, the Memorial Stadium seats about 63,000. The other, two home games, I think were in the 34, 35,000 range.
Yeah.
Obviously not the same kind of setting as game day and nighttime and playing a team like Miami, who was ranked very high at the time. But one of the other things that studying about Cal Berkeley when they joined the ACC, like I think people understand where that Aaron Rodgers played quarterback there and that Jared Goff played quarterback there. But going through like really back to the 60s, I think Joe Kapp, maybe, who was a great quarterback for the Minnesota Vikings. It's almost like clockwork that they've always had NFL quarterbacks. Um, you know, are they the kind of program that they win when they have a great quarterback and they struggle when they have a so-so quarterback, which is a lot of programs like that.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And I think that's kind of been the goal of Justin Wilcox, who's a defensive minded coach. Their defense has been very, very good under his watch. And when they were getting close to being ranked and really having, success early on in his tenure, it was on the defensive side. And even this year, you look at the defense, they've been very dominant at times and especially taking the ball away. And so that's kind of always been their calling card under Justin Wilcox. Figuring out the offensive side has been a real struggle. They're on their third offensive coordinator in 3 years. Um, Quarterback wise, it was even when things feel like they're settled under Justin Wilcox, they just haven't been. And the last couple of years is kind of evidence of that, where they go into the season not knowing who their starting quarterback's going to be. And even this year, you have Fernando Mendoza, who's started the second half of last season, and you figure, okay, he's going to be the starter. And throughout spring, throughout the training camp, it was unclear. They brought in Chandler Rogers from North Texas, who was at ULM at one point and very successful, has had a ton of production over the course of his career, and it was kind of neck and neck, and you weren't really sure. Like one day it would be one guy would be the other, and you're like, okay, they don't have a starting quarterback, and so kind of went that way into the season. Eventually, Fernando Mendoza really took over and look like the clear top option at quarterback. But the last couple of weeks, they've used Chandler Rogers in some situations that where Fernando Mendoza isn't injured, and so that's been interesting. And so, um, yeah, I think it's fair to say that when they've had an elite top tier quarterback, that's kind of how the team goes, and I think that's something they're still searching for. Um, and we'll see kind of what happens as they move forward. But yeah, I mean, I think a lot predicates on what they're able to do. Right now, it's the offensive line is the issue. I think Fernando Mendoza has plenty of talent. I think he has the capability of leading them to where they want to be, but their offensive line has been a problem. They don't really have anywhere to turn. There's not a lot of depth there. They've had injuries that they've had to deal with for the entire season up front, and it's been a real problem. And so I think Fernando Mendoza has the talent to get them where they want to be. But if he's not able to be protected, I think it throws everything for a loop. And that's really, they're still really searching for an identity offensively.
Sure. One of the things following from a distance because of Ben Finley was on the team last year, a quarterback, former NC State player, who's now at Akron. And so I saw the week to week. Is he going to be the quarterback? Is he not going to be the quarterback? They had the kid I think is now at Auburn,
Yeah. Playing
who's
receiver.
rotating in.
Sam Jackson playing receiver at
Yeah,
Auburn.
and he's actually from my home area in the Chicago area, so I knew it was interesting learning about his background before he got to Cal Berkeley. But I think Mendoza has that live arm that is working for him. The other thing I think that's fascinating is if I had asked you in August about what Cal Berkeley's wide receivers and running back situation would look like, and then what might it look like on Saturday, guessing two different answers.
Yeah. And so someone texted me, a Cal fan had texted me and on the first game, and they said, I hope you understand this is the last time that Cal's running backs are going to be healthy. And it was kind of, they went through a lot of issues with that last year. And they had some moments last year where they got down to, the last guy on the depth chart, and it was a scary situation. And so they kind of over recruited in this last offseason to make sure that didn't happen. And lo and behold, they're really in a not a difficult spot, but they're without their star player Jaden Knott. I mean, he has not been healthy since that first game. Scored two touchdowns in the opener against UC Davis, and then went down with an injury and hasn't been the same. Been on
Sure.
the field at times, but has clearly not been 100%, and he hasn't given them what they want at the position. And so they've leaned a lot on a second year guy, Javian Thomas, who was out for a time last year and is still kind of feeling things out and
He's
has
really
some
fast.
really fast. They
Really
nickname him the
fast.
Jet. I think everybody kind of knows him as the Jet. No one really calls him JVM because of that speed, and that's been his nickname since he arrived on campus. But has some talent. Really showcased that in the San Diego State game. Has showcased it at different moments, but in pass protection, he's allowed Fernando Mendoza to get hit, and you look at that and you go, that's just youth. He needs
Yeah.
to learn how to do that and get better. And so they have some different elements, but guys that they don't fully trust. I think Kadarius Callaway on his first touch. He was at Alabama as a safety at one point in time, went to Old Dominion, became a running back, and now is at Cal. Um, Brought in as one of their top, believed top transfers. First touch he gets of the season, he fumbles, and they're on the -1 yard line, and he gets scoop and score, taken in for a touchdown. And there really hasn't been the same kind of confidence in Kadarius Callaway since that moment. And so they have Byron Cardwell as well. It's kind of the fourth guy on their depth chart who was at Oregon at one point. Really looked to be the perfect complement to Jay Nott at one point in time, and then he got injured, was out for the season last year, and really just hasn't been given a full shot to kind of dive back into things. But they have some options, but it just hasn't been the same without Jaden Knott. And I think that's really impacted their offense. And then a receiver. They bring in Keon Graves from Ohio State. They bring in Tobias Merriweather from Notre Dame. Tobias Merriweather was with the team during the spring. Keon Graves came after spring, so he was there in training camp. And you look at that tandem, and early on in training camp, you're like, oh, this is what they've been missing. They have two clear-cut guys who are above the rest of the guys on the roster in terms of talent and their ability, and they both go down in training camp, and they have not played this season. They've been without both those guys. Cole Basha, transfer from Colorado at receiver, was a little bit under the radar, probably an under the radar name to most fans, but a really good receiver, and they've been without him for the entire season. So really depleted at receiver, and I think as much as the coaching staff is not ever going to want to talk about that, I think losing, especially Keon Graves and Tobias Merriweather, has been a huge deal for this offense and not allowed them to do everything that they want to do offensively. And then it's compounded when you don't have Jaden Knott out there to kind of keep defenses honest, and you don't have to respect the run as much because you're not as fearful of those other guys as you would be Jaden Knott.
You know, didn't know either of them going into the season. Watching them on film, I would say that the tight end and the two linebackers could play for just about anybody in the ACC. You know, Olave at linebacker, Andres at tight end are legit NFL prospects. How's it been to see these three-star guys? I think Andres arrived in the class of 2022. Ulava is in the class of 2023, and they are studs. They're stars.
Yeah, I mean, kind of all those guys. Maybe Corey Dyches is the example where, he had a little bit more acclaim than those other guys, but Jack Endries was very much under the radar, not a guy that a lot of people paid attention to, and really kind of started to shine as a freshman, and you were like, okay, he can do some things. And then last year it was like, oh, he's the star, he's the best tight end on the team, and they brought in a lot of tight ends last year, and so he really kind of started to make a name for himself last year. In training camp, was in really making some amazing catches in practice. It hasn't fully translated over to the games, but yeah, you saw him, and he has a really nice connection. He's really, Fernando Mendoza is one of his really good friends, and so they have a really strong connection. And that was kind of the knock on Fernando for a long time, was like he needs to stop looking for Jack Endries. And I'm like, it's so easy. I think he's like, it's so easy. He feels like he's always open, and so they kind of had to get him to like unlearn that aspect of it, because he was always like, oh, check down Jack Endries. That's my guy. I'm going there every time. And so they had to kind of get him to unlearn that a little bit, but they're kind of getting back to having that connection on the field. I've never seen Jack Endries run faster than, in that touchdown last week. And it was really great to see, because it was like, wow, that's a different element to his game. That's something that he's really dedicated a lot of time to becoming a very well-rounded tight end, because he can make the catches in the end zone, and he was a good blocker, but he really wanted to diversify his game and become really the most well-rounded tight end that he can be. And I think he's reached that level now. And so he's really started to come on, the last couple of weeks. That's really been where he started shining. Corey Dyches, out of the gates was really, the Cincinnati transfer was, or the Maryland transfer. Um,
Maryland.
yeah. He was somebody that was like, you saw the elements there and you're like, okay, this can be a really talented piece of their offense. And then, it was like a little bit of a slow start. And then all of a sudden he exploded. And it was like, oh, they have these two weapons at tight end that they can really, really utilize. And so it's, we haven't seen them both on the field at the same time too much, but I know there's probably a plan to make that happen at some point. I know talking to Jack Andrews, especially in training camp, he was like, yeah, we want to get on the field at the same time to see what we can really do. And then at the linebackers, Kedu Luave is really interesting. Training camp, his freshman year, so last year, he came in and there was just not a lot of room. They had Jackson Sermon there, who was, previously at Washington. He's the son of defensive coordinator Peter Sermon at middle linebacker, and there just wasn't a lot of room for a freshman to move up the depth chart. So they had Kedu Luave working with the running backs. He was a running back coming
Huh.
into the season, and he had done it a little bit in high school. And so there was like, okay, if we need an emergency running back, he's done it before. Let's give him something to do. He's not ever going to make a move up the linebacker depth chart. So, it's fine. Jackson Sermon gets injured, out for the year. A couple injuries happen. Kedu Luava, you have to play in the game. And so he ends up, playing the rest of the season, second half of the season, becomes a starter, really has just an impressive finish to the year, and becomes the Pac-12 Defensive Freshman of the Year after starting training camp as a running back. And so um, has really carried that over into this season. I think finding him a running mate like Teddy Buchanan, who is a transfer over from UC Davis, has been key. Um, those guys are, you can tell they're very good friends, but they have this competitive kind of thing about them where they're, every time when they come into the press conference after a game, first thing they do is look at each one of their stats and go like, all right, did I have more than the other guy, or how did this play out? And so they want to rack up tackles. They want to, make the impact that they've been able to make so far this season. And it's been um, really impressive to see. I think Teddy in particular, because you see the numbers that he put up at UC Davis and you're like, okay, there's talent there, but you just never know about the move to that next level and if that's going to translate, and if he's going to be able to be as productive. But when he showed up on campus, I said, oh yeah, he looks the part. That's you can kind of check that off the list. And then you see him in games and he is just everywhere. Very kind of understated personality, just a worker. You ask people about him, and it's like, oh, he's the first guy here, last guy out. He really, truly does want this, and he wants to play at the next level, and he does everything he needs to do to make that happen. And so I think it's a very nice compliment to Kedu Luave, who is that way in his own right, but it's still very youthful. It's still very like kind of wide-eyed, and is excited about every single element of the game. But Teddy Buchanan is a very workman-like kind of mentality where it's kind of all business with Teddy, and he's been very, very impressive this year.
Sure. So Ryan Coa kicker, someone that NC State fans probably don't even remember playing at UNC because he was injured so quickly into his UNC tenure last year. He started off at Cincinnati. He had great numbers at Cincinnati. UNC kicker, as NC State fans know, missed a very crucial field goal against NC State 2 years ago. So they brought in Ryan Coe to compete for the job. And I want to say 2, 3 games into the season, he was out for the season. I saw that he's what, 7 of 15 on field goals this year. I know Cal's played a lot of close games. What has kind of been happening with the kicking game this year?
Yeah, it's really unfortunate because again, there's a couple losses that could have been wins with if he makes his kicks. But I'm also of the mind that you shouldn't have your field goal kicker out there 5 times. You don't need if you're relying on your field goal kicker to make 5 field goals, there's something else that's going wrong with the team. And with the offense. And so I don't put it all on Ryan Coe. It has been really surprising that they haven't at least tried to make a move. Their other kicker is a true freshman, and I can understand the hesitation there to make that move and potentially lose Ryan Coe mentally for the rest of the season. But there has to be some kind of shakeup there because it's become too often that he's missing kicks, and it was something that showed up during training camp, and you're like, okay, I think he can get it figured out because the thing was, and I brought this up to Justin Wilcox in one of the weekly press conferences when Ryan Coe started to really kind of have his issues, and especially in that Florida State game. And we saw him make kicks. Like we saw him make very, very long kicks in training camp, and they had him in as much of high pressure situations as you can recreate in practice. They had him in those
Very accurate
situations.
at Cincinnati.
Yeah, I mean, and it was like he has the leg because he was pushing it back to like 55, 58 yards and without an issue. But it was some of the shorter kicks. It was like those 34, 35 yarders, between 35 and 40 yards. And he wasn't making all those. And everything seemed okay with the operation and it was just, they just weren't going in. And um, it didn't feel like it was ever getting into his head during training camp. And even early on, you didn't get that sense that it's like getting into his head. Now it feels like it's in his head. And that's kind of a problem. That's not kind of a problem. It is a problem for Cal as they really try and push through break through this barrier that I've said, this hurdle of close games, because they're going to need him. They're going to need their field goal kicker. And so whether they make a move, we'll find out this week. But up to this point, they haven't decided on that. And, they're going to roll with Ryan Coe. And so Justin Wilcox has continued to express um, confidence in Ryan Coe. And I think there's reason to have that confidence because they've seen him, like I said, make big kicks. And you mentioned the numbers at other places. And the the production is there. It just has not happened for whatever reason at Cal, and so it's cost them games. And after this last game, you could tell. I think it really got to Justin Wilcox, where it's like, if we just make a kick, none of these other decisions that he made, going for too early against Pitt when they scored their first touchdown, it kind of set Cal back, and they had to chase points. And but in the end, if Ryan Coe makes a field goal, it's a different game. And so I think that you could really start to see that it's wearing on Justin Wilcox, and we'll see if that now leads to a change in the kicker this week.
Sure. Obviously, I threw a bunch of names at you. Anyone else that you think has a chance to pop on Saturday? Anyone else that people should be aware of?
Um, Isaiah Hunter is a really interesting receiver. He really started the season hot and kind of tapered off a little bit as of late, but he's someone to keep an eye on because he's capable of making a big play down the field. I think teams have probably started a game plan against him a little bit more because he came into the season, I think, to most people as a complete unknown. I watched him in high school a lot and very talented player, made a lot of plays. Cal really loved what he brought to the table. Didn't get to do anything last year. Came into the spring going, okay, there's going to be an opportunity, but then you bring in those receivers, like I mentioned, you go, he's going to be buried on the depth chart. And he did some things in the spring, and then in training camp, he really shined. It was like he hit a whole new level. And so it kind of coincided with those guys going down with injuries, and you're like, oh, he's going to be calling the action. He's going to have to, they'll see if he can continue to replicate this. And he was able to do that early in the season. And so that's a very big weapon. And then Noah Williams defensively, I believe still the nation's leader in interceptions, a transfer from UNLV that came over last year. So he was doing kind of similar things last year, came back to Cal and said, I want to put some more things on film because I want to play at the next level. I'm not hearing the things I want to hear from in terms of my NFL potential. I need to put some more things on film. And man, he has been remarkable on defense. Probably you mentioned those linebackers, but he's probably their MVP on defense because, had a kickoff return for a touchdown early in the opener against UC Davis and has just continued to seemingly weekly come up with interceptions. I don't know if they win that game against Auburn unless he has 2 interceptions in that game. He should have had 3. One was ruled a pass interference, and it was not a pass interference. in the end zone. Should have had three interceptions in that game against Auburn. And just every week he comes out, and if you're throwing in his direction, there's probably one pass that's going to be intercepted, and that's been huge for this Cal defense because they have to do everything they can to make up for the lack of scoring on the other side. And there's been a couple kind of kinks in the armor and some lapses, and those have led to the losses. You know, they're only allowing a few touchdowns, a couple of touchdowns a game in these games, and um, it's like the two bad plays are leading to these touchdowns, and that's a loss for Cal. And so they have to be almost perfect, and Nolan Williams has been a big part of that.
And just switching gears in honor of ACC tip-off this past week in Charlotte, any tidbits you want to pass along about Cal Berkeley in basketball this year?
I'm still getting to know the team. I mean, it's been wholesale changes. They've only kept a couple players over from last year. Mark Madsen, I don't think by choice, is kind of taking the Deion Sanders approach of like, hey, we're gonna just swap out the entire roster every year and hopefully something sticks. They're starting to get some traction in terms of recruiting and starting to kind of build some things, but uh I really don't know what this team is going to look like. And I think there's a lot of people who are like, I don't know what this team is going to look like because there's so many new pieces and a lot of talent, I think, and a lot of players maybe getting some second opportunities at Cal. But it'll be really interesting to see how it all comes together because it's a lot of moving parts that you're trying to kind of stick together and make a cohesive unit. And I don't know if there's anybody that knows exactly what it's going to look like because there's definitely some talent, but it's players coming from all over and all different levels.
Yeah, it's interesting. I feel like they're a team of role players. I just don't know if they have that one guy who's going to pop out and get like 15 to 20 points here and there.
Yeah.
Name recognition wise, people point to Andrei Stojakovic, uh, the son of the famous Sacramento Kings player who transferred in from Stanford, which you don't see every day. But we are talking to Matt Moreno. Where can people read your work or see your stuff on Twitter this week?
Yeah, make sure to check out Cal Rivals at Cal Rivals on Twitter, X, whatever it's called these days. And then goldenbearreport.com is where you can check out all the information that we have coming out. We'll have all our interviews with the coaches and players this week and all our coverage leading up to this week's game.
Thank you very much. And it should be interesting on Saturday. Someone's going to win their first ACC game, and I know in State's case they have a bye week. So if they don't pull one out on Saturday, it's going to be a long rest of October. But thank you for taking some time. And like I said, at 3:30 p.m. Eastern, ACC Network, NC State at California. First time the two schools have ever met. First time NC State has ever played in the state of California since 1960 when they had a two-game series at UCLA in 59 and 1960. So that's crazy. They were supposed to play in the Holiday Bowl in 2021, but one of the teams did not want to play that day. Cough, cough, UCLA. So literally, I guess, cough, cough, because they had a COVID outbreak. But but yeah, this is new territory for NC State to travel across this many time zones. But thank you for taking time. And this was Matt Moreno. This is JC Zumbo of the Wolfpack Central, and that'll do it.